Welcome to False Flag Weekly News, the only weekly news show that covers the 15th anniversary of 9/11 the way it should be covered, but of course isn't in the corporate-controlled mainstream. I'm Kevin Barrett with my normal sidekick. Well, normal might not be the right word for him. Professor Tony Hall. He's obviously not a normal university professor, or he wouldn't be on this show. And another very special guest, Joachim Hagopian. Joachim Hagopian is one of our best observers of geopolitics and the alternative information scene. He has a fantastic essay in the new book, Orlando False Flag. In fact, that essay by Joachim Hagopian is maybe really the biggest piece in the book, a terrific summary of the overall geopolitical context of Orlando. So, hey, welcome to both of you. And welcome, Joachim, to your first time on False Flag Weekly News.
Yeah, hi, Kevin, and hi, Tony. Good
Welcome.
to be here.
All right, well, let's get going with the PSAs. First PSA, Oakland, California, this coming Thursday at the Grand Lake Theater. Be there or be no, you don't have to be square. You could actually watch it even if you're at home by way of No Lies Radio. It's going to be live streamed here on nolivesradio.org. I'm going to be there live in person in Oakland, God willing, and a lot of other folks will be too. So that's Thursday at the Grand Lake Theater. It's a kind of a long-term event. I forget exactly what time it gets started. Oh, like 1 to 10 p.m. it says. Okay, 1 to 10 p.m. So hopefully see you there, or I'll see you right here on No Lies Radio. The other big 9/11 event is in New York, where architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth are putting on a weekend symposium on the weekend of the 11th itself. And I hope to be there too. So that one, I don't know where you're going to catch the live stream. Oh, yeah, I guess right here. I think actually we may be live streaming that one too, which sounds like a lot of work for Alan Rees at No Lies Radio. But, hey, I guess he's up to it. So, wow, that's going to be a big weekend. And speaking of the 9/11 anniversary, let's get going on the biggest story of the anniversary. I just wrote it yesterday. And, in fact, it's hardly the biggest story. It's just me mouthing off as usual. 15 years after 9/11, we learned that first responders are showing staggering signs of cognitive impairment, according to a study at the Alzheimer's and Dementia Diagnosis, Assessment, and Disease Monitoring Center. And I just kind of pointed out that it's not just the first responders who are suffering from cognitive impairment, it's the whole darn country. And in fact, the PTSD experienced by almost half of all Americans on September 11th, 2001, according to research cited by Dr. Martha Stout in her book, The Paranoia Switch, very well may be part of the reason. So let's get your thoughts about the upcoming 9/11 anniversary. Tony, what's your take?
Well, there's cognitive impairment afflicting the general population, but the political class, the leadership class, since 9/11 has gone into a period of sort of serial lying, fraud, misrepresentation, the creation of illusion and presenting this illusion as if it's fact. And it's become psychotic. It's become absolutely unbelievable how far this lying, this political lying at the highest level has come.
Joachim, are you going to argue with that?
It's hard to argue with that because all that the government and mainstream media comes out with are lies. So, you know, I think what it does present, though, is an opportunity for us to have more momentum in telling the truth because, 10th and 15th and 20th, these are big numbers, rounded off kind of numbers, where people are more apt to be paying attention, I believe, this year. And I think, there's more stuff coming out all the time. So I have to be somewhat encouraged. And also the fact that everybody, well, I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people aren't, but more and more of us are getting it, that the false flag narrative is completely off base. And as Tony's saying, everything is coming out as lies. And I think more and more people are beginning to finally realize this. Not just us three, but it's a growing crowd of us, I believe.
Well, I agree. I think you're right, Tony, that indeed the powers that be are cognitively impaired in this very strange way. They're completely impaired from telling the truth. It seems like they're no longer capable of telling the truth. Maybe the truth centers in their brains has been damaged. Anyway, let's move on to the next story, which is 9/11 conspiracy gets support from physicists. This was in WorldNet Daily, which is kind of a neocon publication, and it doesn't usually go there with this kind of 9/11 truth stuff. It's got a big audience, so hopefully that audience will learn something from this report on the new study by Steve Jones, Robert Corral, and my dear friend and regular radio guest Tony Zambotti, a mechanical engineer. So this study, which got a little bit of play in the alternative media, actually is getting a lot of readers through WorldNet Daily. What's going on? Has WorldNet Daily decided to leave the Fox News Alex Jones neocon camp and become a truth-seeking outlet? I wouldn't count on it. How about you guys?
Some attribute WND as a Christian Zionist site, so this may be significant. I don't know, Europhysics Magazine, is that a credible, scientifically high-regarded magazine? I'm not sure. I
think so. I think it's a peer-reviewed European journal. Yeah. So
there it is. Of course, all the authors, and you left out Ted Walter of Architects and Engineers. They're all well known as leading scientists, academic voices who've assessed a long time ago that the three towers couldn't have fallen the way that the official narrative tells us it did. Three towers from two planes, do the math right there for starters, just for starters. So this is out there. There's no possible way that these three towers came down from melting steel and gravity. It's obvious, and it does represent a kind of symbol of the cognitive impairment of our times and the absolute unwillingness of mainstream media to tell a logical narrative about the biggest event that transformed the 21st century.
All right. Well, the mainstream media may not be 100% silent on truthful stuff. Over in, what was it, Florida mainstream paper published this next piece in which former Senator Bob Graham said the government needs to release much more about the 9/11 attacks. I like that headline. Joaquim, is that an understatement or what?
Well, yeah, there's thousands and thousands of pages that are still unknown to the public. So, yeah, I mean, it's one more little sign of some movement in the right direction, I suppose. You know, the 28 pages was just a little narrow little hair as far as exposing Saudi Arabia. But let's face it, Mossad has been the central part of it, along with the CIA and the FBI, and of course the neocons in power that had the new Pearl Harbor in mind before they came to power. So, I mean, all that really has to come out. As far as the architects and engineers, anybody that's been following it already knows all that stuff about free fall and it's impossible physics, and it's all just a scam. So it's time to start implicating the real people behind the whole scene, and not just the little Saudi fringe of, Prince Bandar's wife, funneling money out to California to the two, supposed alleged hijackers out there. I mean, it's time to, start getting with the real facts. The neocons in charge got together with Israel's government and the Mossad, and they pulled it off, very sloppily, I might add, but they did. And it's up to us to keep chasing it and keep uncovering the truth, and eventually enough of us will reach critical mass, and enough of us will get it, and hopefully it will bring some accountability.
Well, Tony, do you think what do you think is the reason why Senator Bob Graham and the mainstream media are willing to point out that there was this Saudi family that suddenly moved out and flew home to Saudi Arabia just shortly before the 9/11 attacks, but it will never mention that Zim Shipping Lines, a massive company owned jointly by the Rothschild family and the State of Israel, which itself is owned by the Rothschild family, moved out of the World Trade Center less than a week before 9/11, breaking their lease, losing a huge pile of money, vacating the whole couple of floors that they had, and you're never going to hear that from Bob Graham. Why is that, Tony?
Well, I think the 28 pages are a diversion. They have been a limited hangout, and I think it was designed this way. There is a period in the U.S. political cycle where the nominees for the party, getting the go-ahead from the Democratic and Republican Party, where it's kind of open and there's many candidates, and it's during that period that this 28-page discussion was sort of put into the agenda to divert from the real discussion, which is that Israel did 9/11, or Israel first American Ziocons did 9/11. And so the 28 pages diverted discussion during this crucial period. I think now the real importance for the 9/11 truth movement, the real imperative, is to say we need trials. And Barack Obama betrayed his promises of hope and change. He went along with the war machine. He went along with Wall Street. Wall Street and the war machine are pretty much the same thing. Israel is control of both these centers of power in the United States. And he betrayed the American people. He did crimes on a major level. This phony 10th anniversary killing of Osama bin Laden, what a display of arrogance and contempt for a truthful narrative that was. So Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, Barack Obama, they need to be arrested. They need to be put on trial. As this election, this phony, fixed, rigged election is going forward, the 9/11 truth movement has to be unrelenting in going to events and insisting that the rule of law must prevail at the highest level, and this fraud and corruption at the highest level, embodied in the false flag, the global war of false flag terrorism, has to come to an end. And the only way to do that is to demand legal accountability from the criminals, including Noam Chomsky.
Okay, well, some people are going to say Chomsky, but we'll talk about him some other time right now, because we're still talking, unfortunately, about Senator Bob Graham. And I take it, Tony, you're not so excited about him. But our next story is another Bob Graham story, and I guess Bob Graham is pointing out that in the 28 pages that have been declassified, except for some parts that still remain classified, Omar al-Bayoumi, the top 9/11 suspect, never got a visit from the FBI, according to Graham. But if we talk to the family members of Mr. Bayoumi, such as Ehab Bayoumi, the great-nephew of Omar al-Bayoumi, which I just did, as we see in the next slide, this was an interview from, a month or two ago, we learn that everybody in his family knows that he works for CIA and Mossad. But once again, don't expect Bob Graham to tell you that.
Okay, yeah, they only are willing to go, so far with the truth. I mean, they're all, still part of that establishment. I mean, it's good that Graham's at least, talking about 9/11 and certain things that haven't been exposed. But, he's, again, scratching the surface, periphery, and it's rather superficial, actually. And we need to go much deeper and really get the real culprits. And as Tony's saying, get them in jail. They're all, crime cabal of the worst order, crimes against humanity, and it needs to stop. The whole Rothschild money, war mongering, bankers, all of it.
Well, frankly, I wouldn't mind if the leadership of Saudi Arabia, imploded, if we got regime change there, and of course in Tel Aviv and Washington and a few other places. The Saudis really do annoy me. I've been Muslim since 1993, and one of the most annoying things about being a Muslim here in the United States is that the Saudis have so much influence here. They put a lot of money into the mosques. They control the mosques. They lead purges and coups d'etat in mosques whenever there's a truth teller involved in any of these mosques. So this year, we see in the next slide that Eid al-Adha, the biggest Muslim holiday, which everyone thought was going to happen on September 11th, that is next week, according to Saudi authorities, it's not going to happen then. Well, how do they know? Because the way you figure out when Eid happens is through moon sighting. That is, the lunar calendar, as the Islamic calendar, depends on human beings sighting the moon. That's when the month begins, is when you see the moon. So those who think that they can prearrange when the moon is going to be seen are considered by many Muslims to be really living, outside of Muslim tradition. But that would include the Saudis. Apparently, the Saudis now have appointed themselves as those who determine when the Muslim holidays are and what the Islamic calendar is for the entire Muslim world. And pathetically, most of the American Muslim community is going to go along with this because they are bought and paid for by the Saudis, who are agents of the Rothschild New World Order NATO empire. So frankly, I would rather sight the moon, and if somebody sees the moon on September 11th, or if they were the night before, and so that's the date of Eid, I would rather have my feast on September 11th and do it right. But apparently the Saudis, because of all this pushback they're getting from Graham and stuff, have decided to basically rip up all of Islam, rip up the pages of Islamic tradition, throw it on the fire, and just say, okay, well, this is when Eid is going to be, take it or leave it. So frankly, I wouldn't mind if this witch hunt against the Saudis succeeds, and if the Ibn Saud family and their Wahhabi accomplices all end up in the proverbial dustbin of history. Comments on that, guys?
Well, speaking of the dustbin of history, you rightly point out every week the desecration of Wahhabism, this particular style of what passes for Islam that has been promoted by Saudi Arabia, which of course, due to Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Saudi Arabia has all the money to promote its version of Islam. And it seems to me that this desecration, the real core of the desecration, is the Saudi control of Mecca. And when will this come up for genuine discussion and debate within the Islamic community, that this center of Wahhabism, which is creating this takfiri terrorism, mercenary armies that are being exploited, and Saudi Arabia itself is becoming a kind of base of a mercenary army. It is that's its role in global geopolitics, it seems. So the control of this particular group of the sacred site of Mecca, when will that be truly addressed, Kevin?
Well, we have occupied holy places in Jerusalem and in the Arabian Peninsula, and I think everybody really needs to stand up and liberate those holy places. And ideally, you would have some kind of cooperative group that would be able to sort of maintain these holy places and make sure that everybody from the relevant religions has full access to their holy places. It shouldn't be one nation, certainly not the genocidal regime in Tel Aviv running those holy places, and it shouldn't be the I don't know if genocidal is quite the word, but the psychotic regime in Riyadh running those holy places. So really we need a movement to liberate all of the holy places of the Middle East. They're all under occupation. Right now, I can't really go to either the Masjid al-Aqsa, where I would very possibly face dire consequences from the Zionists, or on the pilgrimage to Mecca, where I very possibly would face dire consequences from the Ibn Saud bandits and their Wahhabi accomplices. So I feel like these holy places are off limits to me. They're under enemy occupation. So I am really obliged to wage all-out jihad, meaning a struggle, a defensive struggle, whether by words or by arms or both, to liberate those holy places.
And let's recall that Jerusalem, in the establishment of Israel and the two-state solution, which was in the Resolution 181 that created Israel at the United Nations, that Jerusalem was an international city to be under UN auspices, with the three Abrahamic religions presumably having sort of equal respect within this internationally recognized religious site, recognized by the UN supposedly being an embodiment of humanity's efforts so far for global governance, as dark and demonic as some see that to be, given that it was done under Rockefeller Rothschild auspices. But Jerusalem is Israel is violating the UN resolution that created Israel in the way it's treating Jerusalem and the way it's treating the indigenous Palestinian population of Jerusalem and their Islamic religion.
Okay, well, we're almost at the end of this 9/11 section, So let's end it with the next 9/11. What will it be? Rumors and whispers suggest a cyber 9/11 that'll totally destroy internet access, probably right before False Flag Weekly News is about to start, no doubt. I don't know. What do you think, Joaquin? Are we going to have a cyber 9/11? Hillary Clinton's warning us.
Well, she's not the only one. I mean, there's the people at Homeland Security that whistleblowing types that said that they've trained for this. The banking industry is all set and prepared for it. So, I mean, to me, it's like, they've been like trying to prepare the American public for some kind of cyber attack, and it could even be a false flag. It's probably not going to actually be the Chinese, but it becomes the convenient enemy like Russia. Russia supposedly leaking the Democratic community. It's all just garbage. From Hillary, who's ready to make war with the world. I mean, she's basically called out Iran. She's going to war with them. She's going to war with Russia. I mean, who isn't going to be at war with this Hillary Clinton? I mean, so it's to me, it's all ridiculous. It's all just fake stuff so that there can be war, military-industrial complex, and world order, one world governance, behind the UN. It's all just a crock of crap.
All right. Well, speaking of made-up stuff, how about ISIS? Moving on to our false flag ISIS news of the week. We have an Israeli think tank, not just any Israeli think tank, but one of the most important and influential think tanks, which is the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, coming out with this position paper saying we must not destroy ISIS because it's a useful tool against Iran, Hezbollah, and Syria. Tony, at least they're admitting it.
It's a proxy army, and it's sort of stating the obvious, and it's yet more evidence for the war crimes trials down the road.
And speaking of evidence, ISIS is said by some to stand for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. Others argue that it's a joint U.S. or NATO Israeli operation. And we came up with more evidence along the lines of where did this mysterious caliph, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, really come from? And we've had contradictory stories. Somebody's been lying to us about this. We were told he was in Camp Bucca, and they tried to downplay it. They said he was in Camp Bucca in Iraq as a prisoner for 6 months, and then a year, and then somebody else said, no, like 4 years in Camp Bucca. And now we're getting reports that much of his time in U.S. custody, he was actually in Abu Ghraib. But it looks like to me that this is a kind of a attempt to muddy the waters because I'm not the only one, but I think I'm one of the leaders of that group of researchers who are pointing out that these lies about how much time Baghdadi spent in the U.S. custody in Iraq suggest that there's a reason that they want to cover this up. There's a reason why they're blowing smoke over this issue, trying to avoid anybody figuring out precisely when and where he was held by U.S. forces, because he was probably being groomed, whether brainwashed MK Ultra style or otherwise groomed, to become the leader of this future ISIS, which was an American-Israeli plan. Is that analysis very likely correct? What do you think, guys?
Well, I recall very clearly when this Islamic State Trojan horse was being wheeled out after Osama bin Laden was made to disappear from the face of the earth in the legend, and the Democrats could wheel out their own approach to the global war on terror. In the early days, it was reported that al-Baghdadi was actually Simon Elliott, an Israeli agent, actually an Israeli person. And I never saw any follow-up to that. I don't see this story in relationship to these current accounts of al-Baghdadi's background. Do you recall that? Simon Elliott is the name of the person who supposedly is al-Baghdadi, an Israeli?
Yes, but that wasn't very well sourced. Joaquin, what do you think?
Well, I think it was the Veterans Today article that came out with that.
Okay, I better not say too much about sourcing at VT.
Okay.
So some of it's great. A lot of it is just sort of whispers, and we can't reveal the source. So anything, I tend to be skeptical on any kind of one-off story like that has no place to follow up on.
Yeah, well, my suspicion is, the fact, just as you alluded to, the fact that they, are going back and forth with all this and contradicting themselves. To me, it's like they are covering something up. It's pretty obvious, I think, for them to be stumbling around like that. So I'm inclined to think that he was probably being groomed, actually, as a future terrorist leader, since America's been behind the whole Mujahideen and onto Al Qaeda, and then ISIS. It's just one more mutation of the same thing. It's all been created, supported by that whole Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, U.S. empire leading the pack along with NATO. So yeah, I think it's just part of the whole program of the new enemy on the block, and he's being groomed for a future role.
Well, they're caught in lies here because Army Colonel Kenneth King, who was the commanding officer at Camp Bucca, told reporters that al-Baghdadi was held there from 2005 through 2009. And then, of course, the military apparently panicked because there are other actually corroborating reports that al-Baghdadi was given the run of the camp, and it sounded like he was basically a protected person or an asset during those 4 years. And suddenly the U.S. Army panicked and put out this denial, claiming that he was held there only in 2006 and only for months. So it looks really bad, and now we're hearing about this Abu Ghraib thing as a distraction. I still say that we need to investigate what was really going on in Camp Bucca from 2005 to 2009. I think al-Baghdadi was being groomed to be the future caliph, and that's who he's still working for. Let's move on to Europe, out of the Middle East and into Europe, where we have Jeremy Corbyn way ahead in the polls. He's up 62 to 38% over Owen Smith. Jeremy Corbyn, for those not familiar with him, is a real, he's a 9/11 truther. He's actually on record with making some fairly decent 9/11 truth statements. Close friend of the apparently possibly assassinated Michael Meacher, who unhappily passed away this year right after Corbyn came into Labour Party leadership, and his main 9/11 truth advisor Meacher then dropped dead suddenly with no warning right after Corbyn got in there. Anyway, Corbyn's going to take over. The Zionists are not happy. Our next slide, we see that Zionist millionaire Michael Foster is leading the drive to stop Jeremy Corbyn. So who's going to win this one? The people who love Jeremy Corbyn or the Zionists trying to stop him? Joaquin, what do you think?
I put my money on Corbyn. Just like Brexit, Corbyn.
Well,
let's
put in context the desecration of the Labour Party, which is supposed to be a social democratic left-wing party, but under Tony Blair, it became the kind of successor to Margaret Thatcher. Tony Blair became George W. Bush's closest ally. The Anglo-American invasion of Iraq was with Tony Blair, who is the closest to being subject to war crimes tribunals, and we should keep emphasizing, arrest Tony Blair. So the Labour Party was obviously subverted, and along comes Jeremy Corbyn, who appears to be an actual honest human being, actually trying to make the world a better place, actually identifying with the heritage of the Labour Party and oppressed workers, and trying to get a better deal for average people in this neoliberal system where everything is taking away any social safety nets or protections we might have to give over to the military-industrial complex and the Rothschild bankers. And he's got a lot of support, genuine support. He's very rare in our political system in the old Anglo-American empire. It's very rare to have an honest person who will actually debate things and give expression to popular sentiments. So Jeremy Corbyn is a very important individual, and the efforts to take him down, this Michael Foster is a classic, Zionist radical, and his hostility called Corbyn's people Nazi stormtroopers, and of course this can be said with impunity in these circles that Michael Foster dominates. He's a showbiz guy, and so way to go, Jeremy Corbyn. Hang in there and create a seed for honest people to get involved in politics and save us from those cabals who are destroying our civilization.
Well, it's ironic that Michael Foster, this Israeli Zionist extremist is calling Jeremy Corbyn an extremist. Over in Germany, we have something similar going on. Germany is pretty much under the control of Zionist extremists, but there's a witch hunt for extremists in Germany. It's happening in the German military, and guess what? It's only the possible enemies of Zionist extremism that they're witch hunting. We heard that they're actually looking for 268 suspected right-wing extremists in the armed forces of Germany, along with 64 Islamist extremists and 6 left-wing extremists. So the Zionist extremists running Germany are witch hunting anybody who doesn't like them and calling them extremists, just as Michael Foster is with Jeremy Corbyn. I guess extremism is pretty much in the eyes of the beholder. Joaquin, any comments?
Well, I mean, look what the Homeland Security and Obama are doing to American veterans and basically dissidents here in America. We are the homegrown enemy. So, you know, I mean, all these fascist totalitarian governments, they're all run by the same world crime cabal, and they're all going after the same thing, you know, going after anybody who happens to disagree with the official line, which are always, of course, lies.
And the official line for Germany seems to be multiculturalism. Let's embrace the migrants, which may, you know, exceed 1 million, maybe into millions now. Nobody really knows. It seems that this flow of migrants, funded largely by George Soros, I see this as an objective to destabilize Germany, a Zionist incited development. Have you seen the cartoon about Adolf Hitler becoming the minister of multiculturalism for Israel? He relents and then tries to refashion Israel as a multicultural paradise. I think that's a good approach. If it's what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If Germany is supposed to be so happy about embracing multiculturalism, let's see Israel embrace multiculturalism.
Well, geez, Tony, you sound like one of those 268 right-wing extremists, as opposed to the 64 Islamists and 6 left-wing extremists. It's interesting. This RT story highlighted the Islamist extremists in its headline, even though they're greatly outnumbered by right-wing extremists like you, Tony. Okay, let's move on to the next story here. That would be the Rothschilds looking to Bulgaria for the new Secretary General of the UN. I guess it's the Rothschilds who have the clout in searching for UN honchos, and this guy that they're trying to put in there, or rather, the female, this female guy, I guess that would be this gal, this woman that they're going to put in there, Irina Bokova, is a former communist apparatchik from Bulgaria, which would make her a great Rothschild Zionist New World Order apparatchik at the UN. At least that's what the Rothschilds think. What do you think, Joaquin?
Well, I mean, you know, you go back to the Fabians, you go back to the internationalists that started the 1913 Federal Reserve. You know, I mean, you know, they're all basically communists, and they were all Stalinist supporters. You know, the father of education, John Dewey, was also a big Stalinist fan. You know, so they've always had an alignment, and they've backed what, the Bolshevik Revolution. You know, the Rockefeller, not Rockefeller, but the Rothschild money. So there's been this tie between basically the globalists and you know, these different factions of communism. So, you know, to me it's no surprise that all of a sudden Rothschild is backing this Bulgarian communist woman that's been, you know, they murdered thousands of people in Bulgaria when they were in power, and now she's being put as the leader of the UN future, you know, running candidate. I don't think she'll get it, but, you know, the Rothschild money's backing her, so she's got a chance.
Well, it's interesting to see this group, you know, the Rothschilds. We refer to them in a kind of generalized way, but here we see Baron Eric de Rothschild, a real person, presented as the behind-the-scenes operative for the United Nations, and a telling little display of what is really going on at the highest levels of power brokerage in our world.
And speaking of what's going on at the highest levels of power, how about this coup d'etat in Brazil? We just had the Olympics in Brazil, and following the Olympics, this so-called legislative coup d'état has apparently come to fruition this week. Michel Turner, a right-wing member of the Brazilian Democratic Movement Party, who is booed at the Olympics, who is implicated in major corruption allegations, much worse than those targeting Dilma Rousseff and her friends. He's the new chief of Brazil. So let's hope Brazil rises up against this. Joaquim, do you think the Brazilian people are going to stand for this?
Oh, they're going to be totally against this guy. I mean, you know, he's Wall Street. He's owned by basically the U.S. empire. So he's just a mouthpiece and a puppet. And, you know, it's a really shame because I think this woman, I think that she actually does represent the people, and she has the people at heart. And you know, it's really a shame to see somebody who actually is really honest. I think she is honest, and I think she, you know, apparently they got her on something that isn't even impeachable. She fudged a little bit of accounting, which I understand that all the politicians do that to make it look good for their term in office so they can get reelected. And it's not even an impeachable offense. You know, so basically it's the U.S. empire. What they've been trying to do with Maduro, basically, you know, Venezuela since Chavez went, you know. They're trying to get rid of all the leaders of South America that are basically for the people, and they're trying to put the old usual, you know, right-wing, totally elitist puppets in there like they do all over the world. And so, yeah, I think it's a sad story, and I hope that the people rise up and throw a revolution, which is something that we need in America too, by the way. But, you know, I'd like to see a revolution and bring this woman back. The one good thing out of it, apparently, is that she's not prohibited from future office, you know, so they voted at least that they couldn't get her on that. But, yeah, it's a real shame, a very sad part of what's going on in the world right now.
Well, let's put this in context a little bit. After 9/11, the U.S. empire, or the Zio-American empire, went into Middle East big time, into Eurasia, the sort of center of global geopolitics, and lost control a little bit of its traditional empire in Latin America. And Hugo Chavez emerged, and Evo Morales in Bolivia, and there's a kind of socialist framework. Dilma Rousseff, and Silva is her mentor. They're not as left-wing as other parts of this Fidel-inspired group that emerged with Hugo Chavez as the key player. And Kevin, you say I'm right-wing. Well, actually, I like this socialist self-determination movement within Latin America. And it seems now the U.S. empire, the Zio-American empire, is clamping down on the part of its traditional empire that it lost control of. And so this kind of coup d'etat, because this Michel Turner is apparently far more corrupt, and the people around him do deals that you know, are way beyond anything Dilma Rousseff has been impeached for. But she's still in the political process, and she's got a great base, and there is a huge upsurge of popular support for this leftist group in Brazil. And left progressives, when they do the right thing, let's embrace left progressivism. 9/11 Truth Movement, we see the merits on all sides of the political spectrum, and we are the platform. We are the true peace movement, and we are the logical point of convergence for these various wings of politics, which want to resuscitate self-determination for peoples, sovereignty for peoples, not giving over our power to cabals and criminals at the highest level.
Well, Tony, I don't really think you're right-wing in general, but that's only if you were drafted into the German army and they decided you were an extremist. That's just how they would classify you. But I don't expect them to draft you anytime soon. Well, our next story moves over to Yemen.
Or incarcerate me, or you know, extradite me for incarceration?
Well, actually,
Okay.
the way things are going, it's
Yeah.
not completely out of the question, but
That's right.
we'll definitely pray that that doesn't happen. Well, over in Yemen, the New World Order lost one this week. They may have won one in Brazil temporarily, but over in Yemen, the Houthi forces, that is the liberation forces in Yemen against this Saudi power grab. The Saudis basically have invaded Yemen to try to impose a puppet government so they can build a pipeline. That's the short version of what's going on, and they're slaughtering the people of Yemen in the process. Well, the resistance in Yemen has taken a bunch of Saudi bases. That's where they're getting all their weapons. So the Saudis notoriously cannot fight. They can't fly their own planes. They couldn't secure Mecca when there was a rebellion in Mecca. They had to bring in the French special forces. You know, the Saudis, on top of all of their other unfortunate characteristics, are utterly and completely incompetent, and they're getting their rear ends handed to them by these completely unequipped, unfunded Yemeni resistance fighters who are out fighting the Saudis, grabbing their equipment, grabbing their bases inside Saudi Arabia. I'm all for the Yemenis liberating so-called Saudi Arabia and renaming it just plain Arabia. How about you, Hakeem?
Yeah, I think it's a win for the good guys here. You know, anytime the Saudis and U.S. and UN are involved, you know, it's they're on the wrong side of history. So, you know, these are freedom fighters. You know, when we call them, you know, the rebels that are trying to liberate their country from oppressors that are occupying their own native land, they are the freedom fighters, and that's what they are. And so they're trying to rid them of this, what? They had a Haiti, the guy. He's a Saudi puppet, you know, and a U.S. puppet, you know, and they're trying to put him back in power, and they're incompetent. The Saudis are incompetent, certainly in almost all ways, and it goes double for their military. They're in a quagmire. Interestingly enough, it's a side note, but I think Turkey's going to get into a quagmire in Syria. But anyway, that's for another talk.
Okay.
Well, this came as a surprise to me that the Houthis were taking over military posts within Saudi Arabia. That's a big story. I noticed that among the weapons caches they discovered were quote-unquote American and Canadian weapons. And of course, like the United States, Canada, my country, the government of Canada is close allies with Saudi Arabia. And that's a monstrosity. That's a desecration. So Houthi freedom fighters, yes, the heritage of freedom fighters is alive and well in Yemen.
And it's also alive and well in Palestine, as our next story shows. Tony, you submitted this story, so why don't you just pick it up where you left off here. A Palestinian flag as a symbol of human liberation at soccer matches.
Yes, I've been looking into Celtic FC, the football team, the soccer team that sports these Palestinian flags. And the Celtic FC goes back to the Irish migration to Scotland, to Glasgow, after the potato famine. And of course, the Irish are oppressed indigenous peoples. The Catholic Irish are oppressed indigenous peoples within Europe and identify with oppressed indigenous peoples all over the world. So this identification of Celtic FC with the Palestinians as oppressed people, as colonized people, as people subject to the impositions of empire. Irish have that history as well. And I think it's very significant to see football. You know, football, unlike the Olympics, there's something authentic about football that, as a truly global unifying force. All you need is a ball. You don't need a big equipment. It's the global sport, and this particular team, Celtic FC, its identification with the injustice visited on the Palestinians, the denial of their humanity, of their human rights, their genociding by the Israeli government. This is a very positive sign in global sport.
All right. Well, we're getting more colors. Talk about the Palestinian colors. These colors don't run. Well, how about color coding the Palestinians as a way to tell the good ones from the bad ones? This is Lieberman, the crazed defense minister who wants to finish the job and slaughter and/or expel the rest of the Palestinians from the entire territory of historic Palestine. Well, he's going to start that process by color coding the goodies from the baddies. Joaquin, what's your reaction?
This is more BS. You know, I mean, it's the divide and conquer all over again. You know, you want to separate your opponent, your perceived enemy, by pitting these different groups within themselves, against each other. So, I just see it as part of the whole globalist agenda, which has always been to divide and conquer every faction of people against each other. And let them all fight it out and weaken themselves, and thereby the elite contain any kind of threat and maintain absolute authority and control. So that's what this is all about.
Okay, well, the Israelis are teaching American cops how to use these kinds of tactics, and our next story was about this Orlando police visit to Israel that came not long after the Orlando false flag of this June. I think this visit happened, was it in July or something? So it raised questions in my mind about whether the Orlando cops are getting a free vacation in Israel for having participated in yet another largely Israeli-sponsored false flag. In any case, I think that cartoon by Latouche kind of says it all, doesn't it? The Israeli trainers teaching the American cops how to shoot people down. What do you think, Tony?
Well, I was fascinated to see the role of the Anti-Defamation League, whose spokesperson over decades has been Abe Foxman. The Anti-Defamation League, puts out periodical smear jobs on you, Kevin, on any group that is trying to stand up for justice. No doubt they've got a hit on the Celtic FC football team, for instance, the Anti-Defamation League. But to see it has this sort of official role in Canada, it's called the Barrett and Prof, and we're currently experiencing some interventions from the Barrett and Prof, which is sort of within the government, and seeing the Anti-Defamation League as the intermediary between the police and military forces of Israel and the police forces of the United States, that was telling to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, if indeed those Orlando cops were getting rewarded for participating in the false flag, and there were a lot of signs that those cops in Orlando were up to something funny. I won't go into all the details. If you want the details, go read Orlando False Flag, The Clash of Histories, which is now available on Kindle, and so are all of my other false flag books. So you can now only pay less than $5.
Especially that one cop there, Kevin, that one cop that had that big smile and kept laughing.
The laughing cop, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. If people haven't read this book and read about the laughing cop and seen his picture, boy, that guy was having the time of his life at a solemn commemoration of the victims. It was, and he was smirking and nudging and, winking. It was like, wow, this is very strange. Anyway, Joaquin Hagopian has this incredible essay in this book. You can read the online version, but frankly, I think the version in the book in some ways is better because I edited it. So anyway, it's a really, really good essay. If you haven't read that, please buy the book, check it out. And then speaking of cops, American cops being trained to shoot people down and to view people, especially people of color, as Palestinians, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, one of my childhood heroes, who actually gets a word of sense and truth occasionally into mainstream media, says that the Colin Kaepernick scandal, in which this 49ers quarterback will not, what is he supposed to do, put his hand on his heart and stand at attention and sing the national anthem, or it's something like that. Anyway, he's not doing it, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar says he's really a patriot. He says, quote, when the government fails in its obligations to take care of people, to protect people equally, it's the responsibility of patriots to speak up and remind them of their duty. Right on, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Any comments on this latest brouhaha over the NFL and the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, Colin Kaepernick does seem to me to be an authentic patriot, a real lover of his country. And in times of such gross corruption, serial lying at the highest level, police, politicians. Nobody seems to be accountable at the highest level for the crimes taking place. Colin Kaepernick in the National Football League comes forward and refuses to stand in the national anthem, and then articulates very well why he took this position. And this story, it seems to me, belongs with the Celtic FC preoccupation with Palestinian rights. Here is a very articulate, thoughtful, compassionate football player standing for true American values and exposing the fraud, for instance, in this election season. We can't allow this election between, this run up between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, with Jill Stein playing a marginal role on the side. We can't allow this to appear legitimate. There's no legitimacy. It's too much cheating. It's too dishonest. So way to go, Colin Kaepernick.
Okay, well, we have 7 minutes left for 8 stories or so, so we have to go through these at about a minute per story. Let's be very terse, concise, very careful with our words.
Unlike these private.
Okay, here we go. 30 activists arrested over the Dakota oil pipeline protests. These protests are all over the place, not just in Dakota. They're happening in Illinois, Iowa, where the pipeline would go. Short version of your feelings on these protests. Where do we start? Joaquin.
I believe in protests. I believe in the First Amendment, and I noticed that there's a blackout, media blackout on basically the ones in North Dakota, the Native Americans up there that are blockading this whole gas line. I think it's great. Protest it and shut it down and get rid of all of that kind of, the fracking and all of the stuff that's destroying our environment.
Of course, this color-coded approach to the Palestinians, we'll see that in the United States here, where those who are accessing, those Native Americans who are accessing federal funds might very well be in line with fracking or pipeline building, where the dissidents within the Native American communities organize the so-called bad Native Americans or bad Palestinians who are so bad they stand up for human rights, for environmental sanity, and there's my 30 seconds.
Okay, and give us another 30 seconds, Tony, about the erosion of federally funded public health care in Canada.
Well, it's a story about going to court as private health care comes in, as U.S.-backed various Trojan horses in the Canadian publicly funded healthcare system, try to move the system towards a private model. Those with money get the faster services, the better services. Those who are in the pot of publicly funded healthcare get inferior services. This is coming to Canada, and of course Canada is an example of how to do publicly funded healthcare that the United States still has not adopted. Of course, you pay for the military in the United States and can't afford to really fund healthcare. In Canada, we don't have so much military, and we have in the past funded public healthcare.
Well, if the USA decides to invade Canada, Tony, you'll wish you'd spent some more money on your military. I think the USA kind of already has about as much influence in Canada as it needs, although it'd be nice if it didn't. Let's move on to Paul McCartney, a very important topic here. Paul McCartney. Didn't Jim Fetzer get fired over something like that? Anyway, we had a great story over what really happened here about how documents now show that the British Army brass tried to stop the 1914 Christmas truce, in which the Germans and the British didn't fire at each other during Christmas. And, of course, the brass wanted people to keep killing each other even on Christmas. Paul McCartney has this great song, Pipes of Peace, about this. But as we see in the next slide, the real Paul McCartney, the peacenik Paul McCartney, apparently has been replaced by a brain-dead Clinton cash cow zombie. That's right, Paul McCartney, or maybe it's Fall, that is the false Paul, that Jim Fetzer believes took Paul's place after Paul died in a car wreck back in 1967 or whenever it was. This Fall, fake Paul McCartney is going to Hillary Clinton fundraisers, $25,000 a ticket fundraisers, some tickets as much as $100,000, and he's playing, I guess, Hillary's theme song, which would be "Can't Buy Me Love." You can't make this stuff up. What do you think, Joaquin?
It's obscene. All these people that are, jumping in her bandwagon. It's just obscene because she's such a criminal. And I mean, for people that you kind of look up to it as a young person, Margaritaville, that's who hosted this event.
Yeah,
It's
Jimmy
really
Buffett.
sad. Yeah, it's really sad to see these people that are co-opting this evil cabal. So they're part of it. It's to me, it's just a sad commentary on the power structure. It's taken over the entertainment industry. It's an ugly thing.
I think they've all been replaced.
If the real leader of the Beatles, John Lennon, was with us, you can be sure he would be a 9/11 truther, and he would not be going to fundraising events for Hillary Clinton. He would be calling for the arrest of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and demanding that we come to terms with the covered-up realities of 9/11 and the masses of false flag events that have resulted from our failure to deal with the lies and crimes of 9/11.
Well, I don't know if we can get John Lennon on this show from Beyond the Grave, but we might be able to get Lynn Johnston, his identical twin. So we'll work on that at some point. How about this next story? Israeli Zuckerberg humanitarian internet for Africa satellite blows up. I assume that's good news. This is a Zionist plan to try to control the internet. What do you think, Joaquin?
Well, I thought they already controlled the internet. Maybe TTP hasn't been quite passed yet. I have a good sense that both the TTIP and the PPT, I get confused with these. Anyway, I have a feeling that they're going down, and the internet's going to, at least for a little while longer, stay with truthers and some dissemination of information that's real. I'm hopeful that that's still going to be the case, that we're going to be around for a while, I hope.
Well, it's interesting to see Zuckerberg and Netanyahu on the same page, Facebook all involved with Israeli security firms. Last night I had a visit from a colleague at the University of Lethbridge, and he showed me a video which I sent along of a flying object in the background. If you look at my Facebook page, you could see that, and so it looks like there may have been some kind of beam shot at this satellite, but that's speculation.
And if that's true, maybe the Iranians are using that kind of special energy device that they supposedly have. It looks like Israel is down; its satellites are blowing up on the launch pad. Iran is going up in the world. They've got S-300 missiles deployed now at the Fordo nuclear facility. And those missiles, those defensive missiles, are very, very accurate. And it looks like the Israelis are going to have a hard time if they really want to keep this plan on the back burner for going to war with Iran. They might as well just dump it because it's not going to happen. We've only got a couple of stories left in a couple of seconds. So how about this next story? Geoengineers push back against the exposure they got with the New York Times story. The scientists say no, just say no to the chemtrails conspiracy theory. Well, go to Geoengineering Watch to find out about what's actually going on up in the sky. Speaking of what's going on in the sky, if they're geoengineering our climate, don't even talk about that. Don't talk about your ideas about what climate change is or isn't in class. You have to drop the class if you disagree with the professor. Tony, do you tell your students to drop the class if they disagree with you?
Well, I try to welcome students who disagree with the professor. To me, it's a demonstration of kind of commitment to the academic calling, and I congratulate students who disagree with the professor up to a certain point.
And it's funny how you're allowed to tell the students to drop your class if they disagree with you if you're teaching orthodoxy, but if you're questioning orthodoxy, as you sometimes do, Tony, no matter how tolerant you are, they're going to find some way to complain about you, or the authorities are anyway, not the students. Okay, finally, how about this near miss with the asteroid? The world nearly ended this week, and it's our last story, which tells you how many important stories we cover here at False Flag Weekly News. A 180-foot asteroid went by Earth much, much closer than the moon. It's a giant asteroid, like, 25 to 55 meters high. That is almost 200 feet. wide, much as big as the object that exploded over Russia and injured 1,000 people. If that had hit right at our server where we put out False Flag Weekly News, you wouldn't be watching this right now. But you are watching this, and hopefully next week you'll be watching it again if no asteroids hit us. So until then, Kevin Barrett with Hakeem Hagopian and Professor Tony Hall of False Flag Weekly News. Have a good week.